Hi, I'm Scott Broberg, President of SBR Financial Group. This is the second video in a series covering the United States federal tax system. And what we want to talk about in this video are who are the players, who's involved in this system. Now I'm going to break it down into three areas. I'm sure it's more complex than that, so many of you will think of many other players that are involved, but this is just the basic understanding of who's involved in this. So what we're also going to do is use a technique to gain a better understanding is to compare it to another country, particularly if you have a country whose system is not very efficient or does not work effectively. And in this case, we'll be comparing ours to the system in Greece. So who are these players? Well, let's start over here. We're going to start with the public. So we have what's in our system, and actually every country does, you have a public economy. So the public economy is made up of individuals and then businesses. So individuals go to work and they earn an income. Businesses produce goods and services and they earn an income. So individuals and businesses that are privately held make up the public portion of our economy. Okay? So the second one in line is collection and enforcement. And we're going to divide this into two sides. So we have the collection side, and then we have the enforcement side. Okay? Then the final thing is going to be our United States government. And the government, of course, is made up of three branches. Okay? We have the legislative, which is the Congress, judicial, which are our judges, and then executive, which is the president. Okay, those are the three players that we're going to go ahead and look at. So let's come back to the public and talk about them. So as I mentioned before, you have individuals and businesses. So let's say individuals go into businesses to produce goods and services, and they earn an income. So the government now decides what we're going to tax over here is exactly this. And that's why we call it, of course, the income tax system. What we have to come up with is what percentage or rate of that income are we going to tax. Now immediately you can see where much of our political debate is centered. It's around this rate. Okay? And then, of course, most people would like to pay of a lower rate, but that's not always how it works out. So most of our debate happens right here around this debate. So what happens in the public or private economy is that money begins to flow, and it flows through businesses and individuals, and this creates our economic engine that runs the country. Now the government has decided then, or the people, in order to fund their government, since the government doesn't actually sell anything, is we're going to use this tax system to bring money. So we've got to get money that's over here, and we need to flow it through some system to get it into the treasury. Okay? So second is, how do we do that? Well, we've got two sides to this. One is the Internal Revenue Service. They have been designated as the collection arm. So the area of the government whose responsibility it is to interface between the private sector, the public and businesses, and the government in order to move that money is the IRS, and that's what we do every year when we file a tax return. Now, there's more happening throughout the year on that, but essentially we file something that's created by the IRS and a return that says, here's how much income we made, here's how much tax we're actually going to pay into the government. Now, of course, collection is absolutely pointless unless you have some kind of enforcement that can enforce the rules. That's the part that comes into both tax courts and what the ability for the U.S. government to say, hey, you don't pay your taxes, well, there's going to be a punishment for that. So collection enforcement are the second one. The third one, of course, is our government, and this is where another one of the arguments come in. And so the legislative, the Congress, each year passes what we call a budget. Whoa, I got to spell that right. Passes a budget. Let me go ahead and erase that. Okay. So what the budget tells us is we take money from here, we collect it, and we put it into the Treasury. How are we going to spend that? Now, this is the second of the two big arguments that happen. How do we spend the money? What percentage do we collect? A third and minor argument that comes in is when people talk about simplifying the tax code. Make it more efficient for the money to get from here to here. The more efficient it is, the better off we all are, and the tax code is what goes into that. So what we want to do is take a look at what happens when any one of these begins to collapse, because the whole system is predicated on all three of these areas functioning efficiently and effectively. So let's start with the public over here. And let's say that there's a couple things that could happen. One could be that the amount of money right here begins to decline, meaning that the economy goes into a decline, like a recession. Well, if there's less people bringing in income or less business income being generated, then the overall percentage, while that may stay, the rate may stay the same, but the overall dollar amount that flows through here and ends up in the government is going to go down. So the whole country benefits when the economy is functioning at a high level. And this is what everybody really pays attention to year after year. Now, the second part of this is, what if the people in the public decide that they're not going to pay their taxes? So the tax evasion takes place. So if more and more of our public were to decide at some point in the future that we're just not going to pay, or we're going to find ways to reduce the amount that we're paying, then of course less money flows into the system. Okay, so those are just two ways of how this side, the public side, actually has to function well in order to get the money to flow into the government. Now let's move to the collection enforcement side. Well, what if, and this is when we go back to this simplification of the tax code, what if this becomes too inefficient, too complex? Then it becomes too difficult to take the accurate amount of money from here over to here. Complexity makes everything difficult, and you end up having to spend money in order to get the money efficiently from here to there. So that's one way that this part can become ineffective. The second one has to do with tax courts. Okay, and when we look at a country, one thing we'll notice is that if enforcement goes down, well then who's going to pay their taxes, right? If less people pay because they know that that there's no enforcement of the rules, then less money makes it into the government. A good example for those of you who like to research this stuff is the country of Pakistan. I recently heard that it's been like 25 years since anybody has been prosecuted through the tax courts for not paying their taxes. Well, if you go that long with no one being held to account to pay their taxes, everybody quits paying their taxes. So the third one, of course, is when the government gets a hold of the money, and it all has to do with spending. And this is the other area that people get very animated about. What if they spend the dollars ineffectively? Or what if there's graft or cronyism in the government, and so money is wasted? Nobody likes having money wasted. Okay, so this is what would happen if any one of these fell apart. So what I'd like to talk about is one country that has recently been in the news, and that is Greece, because Greece exemplifies many of these issues that we see with taxes, and why their country ends up struggling if these are not paid or are not functioning correctly. So let's go back to, and we're going to write this down here, Greece. Whoop, that didn't work. Let's erase that. Let's get a little bit different color here. And we're going to call this Greece. So there's a well-written article by Michael Lewis, who writes a lot about financial issues. And one of the things that they mentioned was the number of people in Greece who actually pay their taxes is very low. Part of that is that everybody knows that nobody else pays their taxes. So no one wants to be the one guy that's going to end up throwing his money into the government when nobody else is. Now, we have the opposite here in the United States. Everybody assumes that everyone else is paying their taxes. And because we assume everyone else is doing it, we do it as well. So there's actually benefit to our country because we all voluntarily go through the process of making sure we pay and file our taxes. When we hear about somebody who didn't pay their taxes, we normally are appalled by the fact that it didn't happen. So that's one. The second part of Greece comes in here in these tax courts. If it came about that the tax court said to this guy over here, I'm going to go ahead and enforce this, well, he comes back with a bribe. And because of the level of corruption, the bribe gets him out of the tax courts. So what just happened? How much money did the government get? Zero. Because the money went from this guy's pocket into the bribe of the judge, so the tax courts weren't even effective. So Greece has the effectiveness of their tax courts, and again, this is the same in Pakistan, is very low. So you can see now money's just not moving. Okay? And then the third one has to do with the economy. So economy. Okay, so because the economy was down over here, they're not producing very much, which means that there's money's not flowing and the taxes aren't happening. The government goes over here and says, we're going to create jobs. We're going to start employing people to be on the government's dime. Well, nothing's being produced. And the government ends up spending more money to employ all of these people than they'll actually get back, if they get anything back. Because what if it doesn't even come back through the system? So you can see in the case of Greece, all three are functioning very inefficiently. And this becomes problematic because it gets built into the culture of the country. And it becomes very difficult to change when you have to change at every single level. and nobody trusts the fact that the other side is going to actually do their job. So this is what happens. This is why it's so important for us in America to maintain rule of law, to maintain representative government, and for people to maintain the trust that when they pay their taxes, it's flowing through the system efficiently and being spent efficiently. So the bottom line is the U.S., we do a great job with voluntarily paying our taxes, and it's a fairly efficient movement through the system, although we do notice that over time this tax code begins to get bigger and more complex, and every once in a while we have to go back and make adjustments to that to simplify. Okay, so that's the players of our tax system. Be sure to check out the following videos on the federal tax system.